vote to leave it the same, we can vote to change it.
I mean, we don't vote. We don't vote until we vote on the policies.
So right now, we don't have to change it even bring forward.
I already squeezed my team.
All right, unless I hear a motion
A motion for what?
to make it.
I mean, I motion to make that change, but we're not making, we're not.
I mean, that's right, this is a workshop. Okay, I forgot, this is a workshop.
Yeah.
So any other comments?
Hello and welcome. Thank you for tuning in to the School Board Patriot podcast. I'm your host, Michelle Mandarin. Here, I will be discussing with you the happenings of the school board meetings here in Pasco County, informing you of any actions that have taken place and everything that happens in between. I wanted to give you guys a little bit of an update. I know I haven't posted in a while and I missed the last school board meeting, not this past one, but the one before that. And granted, there was nothing much to talk about in that school board meeting, but all right, I don't know how long this episode is going to be. I wanted to talk a little bit about what happened overall throughout this year. So sort of like a refresher and to let new viewers catch up on the things that have taken place throughout the year. Any new viewers of my show. In addition to that, I'll be speaking about the school board meeting that happened this past Tuesday on the 19th. And what took place during the workshop that happened beforehand. So first, I want to talk about what has happened this past year in its entirety. I'm going to go back to the fact of why I started doing this and what got me involved. So for those that you may not know or are new to watching my show, I started going to school board meetings the beginning of last school year, mainly because of all the things that have been happening throughout the country with the woke curriculum and all the things that they're trying to put in schools, not knowing that those things would be happening within our district. I didn't believe that anything was happening within our district. And it's hard to see when you're not actually involved. So I just wanted to say that. So the main reason that I actually started getting involved was because I did meet the group Pasco Watch and shortly joined them. They have shown me a lot of things that the school board has approved. One being the organization TNTP, or the New Teacher Project. I don't know if you guys have heard of it or been on pascowatch.com and read a little bit about it. But the New Teacher Project is an organization that was hired by the school board for teacher training. One of the first times that was approved by the entire board was on October 20, 2020. It was requested by the Department of Office for Leading and Learning, and it was a purchase of professional learning services assistance from TNTP to support curriculum, instruction, and assessments. You guys can look it up on the board docs. It's all up there. So this was approved by all the school board members, and when I learned about it myself and I looked it up and all of us provided this information to the board did show some concern and in turn requested a workshop for it. That being said, we were hopeful and we waited till the next school board meeting for the workshop to take place, only to find that it wasn't there. Digging deeper into the agenda, we found that somebody, don't know who, tried to hide the TNTP to be voted on under miscellaneous purchases. And so rightfully so, we as community members and parents were pretty upset about that. So we went to that board meeting and demanded to know why they would do this and to find out why there was no workshop that was taking place. And Kurt Browning had stated and defended that we needed to utilize TNTP under the Schusterman Foundation. Take a look at what the Schusterman Foundation is about, and you'll see that's not an excuse. And that we needed to use the funds for community engagement, even though we had been using TNTP for quite some time. So his excuse was that he unilaterally decided that they were going to have TNTP put on the agenda because the workshop would have taken place after the meeting, so it was irrelevant to have a workshop. That is not an excuse. Megan Harding was the only one on the board that said no to TNTP at that meeting. Even so, it was the majority vote, so it passed, and we did not receive said workshop until 6 months later. So who knows what TNTP has done? We have no idea. We're not allowed to see. Obviously, we weren't provided the workshop until much later. And knowing that, they probably didn't release as much data as we wanted. But if you go onto TNTP's website, you'll come to find that TNTP's mission is to end the injustices of educational inequity by providing excellent teachers to the students who needs them most, and by advancing policies and practices that ensure effective teaching in every classroom. Sounds fantastic, right? But most things look good on the surface. If you look deeper into their website, you'll see a blog by the former CEO with a title that says, "We have to be honest about racism in schools." He believes that schools and school systems, and I quote, "don't grapple with the effects of systemic racism, but they actively perpetuate it." I don't understand why they continue to work with TNTP. They state that TNTP does not have anything to do with curriculum. They are not imposing anything. But as I just read before, on the paper of October 20th, 2020, they hired TNTP to provide curriculum and teaching instruction. If it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck, it's a duck. And in addition to this TNTP organization that the board decided to work with, Kurt Browning also created something called an Equity Advisory Council, which he has now changed the name to because we figured it out. I looked up this Equity Advisory Council. You can't find anything on it, but I did find the application for it. Yes, so this group was created to devise strategies and solutions to make our schools more equitable. Community members and parents are not allowed to at these meetings with the council, so we have no idea what they're doing. But like I said, I found the application that was released in 2020 for this council. And on the application, it asks to describe your experiences and training related to systems and structures of opportunity, social justice, racial consciousness, cultural competency, and culturally responsive education. Now, you may not know what racially consciousness is, but you do know what social justice is. So I'll give you the definition of what racial consciousness is. So racial consciousness or race consciousness is viewing someone based on what their race is, and doing otherwise would be considered racist. And I quote from Kimberly Crenshaw's Critical Race Theory book: "With its explicit embrace of race consciousness, critical race theory aims to re-examine the terms by which race and racism have been negotiated in American consciousness among African Americans and other peoples of color, a tradition that was discarded when integration, assimilation, and the ideal of colorblindness became the official norms of racial enlightenment." So in other words, it's saying that racial consciousness is embraced by critical race theorists. When I asked about this application, it was falling on deaf ears, though I did have one board member reach out to me when I asked this question, and Kurt Browning had answered them. And he said, and I quote, "This application was written in the summer of 2020 and used to solicit interest in serving in the fall of 2020. The application is no longer being used since the EAC, the Equity Advisory Council, has been constituted and completed their specified work. You are also correct that I, as superintendent, asked my staff to create this council. As I stated to you on Friday, I wasn't aware of the specific questions on the application because I trust my team to act appropriately." When I did ask about this application, it was quickly removed and deleted. So thanks for the Wayback Machine. I could still see it. So would you be comfortable knowing that there was a team advising the board and the superintendent to create equitable practices for our schools based off of the experiences that they have with social justice and race consciousness? And I mean, it's a serious question. Would you be comfortable knowing that there was a group advising the board and the superintendent to create equitable practices with those terms? I think it's a fair question. I also wanted to remind you guys that TNTP is funded by the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, which I know most people are not comfortable with. I want to mention also that some of the board members, more specifically Cynthia Armstrong, had defended TNTP and had stated that they needed fresh eyes and fresh ideas to get closer to their goals for community engagement. Again, would you trust an organization that has such radical ideas and thoughts about the school systems? And what's ironic about her comment and her defense again for community engagement, ironically, Armstrong disables her comments on her social media. So you can't really even engage with her on social media. Doesn't seem like community engagement to me. Another highlight I wanted to bring up that we had issues as community members and parents is the enactment of social emotional learning. A lot of people don't understand the dangers of social emotional learning, and I have talked on it before on my previous episode, but I wanted to do like this episode as a refresher. And so I want to reiterate what social emotional learning is. So social emotional learning, or SEL, is a way for schools and teachers to help students who are struggling emotionally, more specifically with mental health. And in the words of Cynthia Armstrong, is to teach kindness. Now, CASEL is the organization that is working with our school board to implement social emotional learning. And I have come forward with the board showing them what CASEL thinks is appropriate to teach and what SEL should be used for within the classroom. So, and one of the webinars for the CASEL and on social emotional learning, they talk a lot about social justice and how it should be used. Social emotional learning should be used to combat racism. The CEO, or the now former CEO of CASEL, has been noted saying that we need to use social emotional learning in classrooms to combat racism. So it's not a secret. You can go on CASEL's website, look it up. CASEL is spelled CASEL, CASEL. And if any of you guys watching know what's going on throughout the world, CASEL was created by a Rockefeller. If you really want to learn more about social emotional learning, I really advise you guys to check out James Lindsay. He's on Twitter. He has a podcast. He has a couple of books that I'm currently reading. He's really intelligent and very well informed with all this social emotional learning. And he thinks it's one of the greatest threats to our young children in our society. So I really advise you guys to check him out. James Lindsay, he's really cool. I actually got to meet him this past weekend, which was awesome. Another thing that I come to find that social emotional learning hasn't even been proven to work. It's new. They say that it's been around, but it's new within our school system. It has been billed as a transformational tool. It's supposed to propel students to greater academic achievements and personal fulfillment, but there's a pioneer study that makes it clear that the research evidence to back up these claims are very thin and unpersuasive, and the risks of SEL poses a threat to student privacy and health. So I advise you guys to check it out. I'll post some of the links as references so you can check it out yourself. If you look at the Pasco County Schools mental health assistance allocation plan, there's a bunch of wording in there that state that they are using data collection to monitor children's mental health. I do not agree with it. I will add a link in the description so you guys can check it out. I do not support social emotional learning. I think it shouldn't be in the schools. I think it's doing more damage than anything. You can even see that there have been more fights in the schools now than ever before, and they blame it on COVID, but it is not COVID's fault. It's this social emotional learning stuff that they're pushing down these kids' throats, and it's just damaging them. Not all kids and not all schools, but I understand that it's doing more damage than good. And I don't know if you guys knew this, but on the half days, 90% of the half days this past school year were for SEL training for the teachers. All right, so In addition to the social and emotional learning that I've been super concerned about, I actually went up to Cynthia Armstrong and requested some of the curriculum that they use. Technically, it's not curriculum, they're benchmarks that they use throughout all curriculum to use. They have benchmarks that teachers can use as a guide. And this is what I found on there. And I will provide links this is now under investigation, by the way. It states, exhibit awareness of civic and community responsibility, including the needs and available resources in the community. Sounds nice, right? But then you go down and it states, describe one's own personal identities. An example, gender identity, race, ethnicity, national origin, etc. Describe your race, describe your gender identity. Doesn't sound like it's about kindness to me. And under that, if you go down, it says discuss stereotyping, discrimination, and prejudice, and analyze their impact on you and others. This is not about kindness. Why are these under the benchmarks within our school system? There's teachers using this in the schools. So to wrap up my little refresher, I mean, you guys can go back and look at my past episodes where I go into more detail on all these things. So we have our board who hired TNTP, a woke organization, for lack of a better word, for teacher training and community engagement, conjoined with an equity advisory council that was formed by individuals that have expertise in social justice and racial consciousness, and SEL benchmarks that ask students to identify themselves and to look at their own bias, all the while sending teachers out of state to woke and left-leaning conferences. I forgot to mention that, but yes. There have been instances where we came forward to the board because they were sending teachers to out-of-state conferences in left-leaning states with woke ideologies. I have more details. All of this is under Be in the Know on PascoWatch.com. Go to PascoWatch.com under the tab Pasco County Schools and Be in the Know. There are detailed information about TNTP, about what critical race theory really is, what CASEL is and social emotional is, along with a couple of other organizations that are being used and utilized within our own county. I advise everybody to check it out because knowledge is power, and the only way to combat all this is to understand what you have to look for. And I want to also note that personally, I think Megan, being the only one on the board that actually listened to us and actually voted no on TNTP that one time, she had voted yes on it before we had provided her with the information. I just wanted to make that note. Megan Harding has a good heart, but she gets bullied and trampled over by the other board members. And I will go over that a little bit when I talk about the workshop that happened this past Tuesday, because I witnessed and it was very painful to watch. Okay, that being said, I want to go over the workshop that had taken place this past Tuesday. It was all about the Parental Bill of Rights. It started off that way anyway. It spoke on these consent forms that are provided to parents. It's a requirement now that the parents have to opt in or opt out of certain things throughout the school. So some of the consent forms will be about the surveys, about medical services that can be provided, like hearing screenings, vision screenings, all that jazz. It was noted that it is a work in progress. So they said that any feedback, I don't know if they were talking about the community, or the board in specific, but they said that they needed feedback to know or what to do to tweak it. They also spoke on how clubs will be posted on the websites now. So if you want to see any of the social clubs that are in your child's school, all you have to do is go on the website, along with the curriculum. Curriculum will be posted on the website of the specified school that your child goes to. And another note that was taken and a question was asked was about tests, and tests that your child are taking in school, like the PSATs and all the SATs. That is not considered public record according to them, so you cannot request to see that. Some of the questions that were asked by the board is if these consent forms will be solely on the computer. If there are parents that do not have a computer, how are they going to fill it out? All variable questions, which I completely understand. One of the ideas that I liked was having the computer set up during Meet the Teacher Day where parents can go in, take just a couple of minutes because it is literally a yes or no question, consent or not, opt in or opt out consent. And you can actually save your spot so that you don't have to go back and do it all over again, which I thought was really cool. It was also mentioned that possibly they can have hyperlinks during those consent forms so you can go back and look at what you're actually consenting to, because it's not, everything is not listed there. You have to go back and do a little reading. So I thought that was really awesome. One of the concerns also was that what about the parents that are not really engaged with their student, with their child and in their schoolwork? And that is a good question. And well, the answer was that if the parent does not either opt in or opt out, that it will be an automatic opt out, and that the teacher in the school would have to call and ask them if any of those things were to take place. So one of the board members had brought up a good point that they could use Meet the Teacher Day as a way to engage parents to actually do the consent form right there, then and there on the computer. It takes a couple of minutes. I thought that was a good idea, but for those parents that possibly miss it or decide not to do it, that the student would be automatically opted out, and it would be the school's responsibility to call said parent to make sure that, the parent wants it or not. Say, for instance, the child has to, it's time for the screening for their ears or their eyes. And so the school would have to call the parent and ask them, hey, do you want this to happen? They say yes or no. So I thought that was a good idea. And I really think I love this whole requirement for parents to be more engaged. I really hope it sheds more light on, parents actually doing something and engaging with their student. I think it's very important for parents to actually get involved with their children's schoolwork. And I know it's hard, but you got to prioritize sometimes, right? Another thing that was mentioned also was, what about parents that have newly enrolled their student? It was stated that even if you were to newly enroll your student into the school, you would be automatically emailed as you send your email, your phone number when you sign up. It will be automatically sent to you, so everyone will be notified, which is awesome as well. Some of the parents and community members within the audience, and I won't say who, were a little bit concerned about the whole human growth and development part of the consent form. They believe, and I can agree with this, is that the human and growth and development should be an opt-in only, as it could be very sensitive and they wouldn't want their child to be exposed to something they're not ready for. And I can relate to this because that happened to my child, and I don't understand how it happened, because after she was at the end of 4th grade, which I don't understand why that happened, because she was not supposed to have it until the next year. So I can understand why some parents would be concerned that it should be an opt-in only. Their mistakes can be made, and that is a very sensitive subject. All right, so after the workshop on the Parental Bill of Rights, the board went over a couple of Neola policies that needed to be looked at. For those who do not know, Neola is the organization that our board uses to use policies. They are more of an aid used by the board to guide them and to keep them legal with policies. Again, it's a guide. Neola is not the one that made an oath to the Constitution. The board members, who are elected officials, are the ones that made an oath to the Constitution. They're the ones that have to make sure that these policies are legal and that they are not breaking any laws. That being said, there was a policy that has made some controversy that made it on the news. It's policy 5120. You might have heard of it. So what part of this policy is so concerning? This policy states the superintendent may assign or reassign students on a case-by-case basis to schools or programs other than that designated by the attendance area when the superintendent or designee determine that such an exception is in the best educational interest of the child or to prevent disruption of the educational environment or otherwise promote the health, safety, or welfare of the student, other students, or staff. Now, the superintendent decided to use this policy to remove one student from a school to another, not for the welfare or safety of the student or students or staff, not to prevent the disruption of educational environment, because this child did not do any of those things. It was not in the best interest of the child. He used this policy to move the child because of her mother. Her mother decided to come to the board, the superintendent more specifically, because she was having issues within the school. The issues that she was bringing forth to the board and the superintendent were not being addressed. So what happened to her daughter? Very questionable things were taking place within this school. They were given surveys, more specifically equal opportunity school surveys, or they were asking her very personal questions and asking her what her sexual identity was and what her pronouns were. And not even that, but it made her uncomfortable because the said teacher had told her to keep this a secret from her parents. I would be concerned about that, wouldn't you? So when coming forth to the superintendent, he ignored her and continued to ignore her. And up until the point that he probably got annoyed, because it's been said that he likes to sweep things under the rug, decided to move her from that school to another one instead of addressing the actual issue at hand. There are children in that school that are probably dealing with the same thing and they don't want to say anything because then they'll be moved. So it made the news. You guys can look up the article. So bringing up that particular policy, they saved that policy for last, and for good reason, because they knew that it was going to be an issue. It was very painful to watch. I'll show you guys a clip. Check it out.
The process for educational disruption versus the welfare or health of the child, that we would still allow the superintendent to make those. I'm just wondering how you would say that.
I would think if we're going to do that, we just take out the welfare take out the disruption altogether. I do not want to throw an appeal process in the middle of that policy.
Well then, okay, because I just don't think that to prevent disruption, I don't think that that's very defined.
So the reason that this section of the workshop was very painful to watch was because you could see that Megan was actually trying to advocate for the student. She really wanted the best interests of the child to be there. She really wanted the best interests of the child to be the main focus. She kept bringing up that that part and specifically needed an appeal process. The part that said to prevent disruption of educational environment, we wanted to know what's the difference between that and the student code of conduct. There are children that were removed from their school for heinous acts, for disrupting schools, right? But they got an appeal process. Yet there's this policy in hand that the superintendent did use wrongly, and there was no appeal process. And they just kept hammering her, said, well, what about if the student has a restraining order? They kept using that word. It was really annoying. All the board members, aside from Megan, said that they wanted to keep the part that said this disruption. They want to keep disruption in the policy. And Cynthia Armstrong more specifically stated that she did not want to throw the appeal process in the middle of that policy. That for some reason, if you threw an appeal within that policy, that you somehow had to take out disruption altogether. I don't understand why, but she thinks that if you throw in the appeal process within that policy, that you have to take out disruption. Didn't make any sense to me. Another thing that was very aggravating was mainly Cynthia Armstrong kept saying that it wasn't right to take away his right, the superintendent's right to use this policy, that it's his responsibility. Then what do we need the board for? Just give him all the power and we don't need a board. So my question is, what does a restraining order have anything to do with it? 5120 was only ever used once by the superintendent within all the years that our district has been open. When have we ever needed this? When has a restraining order ever been an issue? We have the student code of conduct. We have an appeal process in that scenario. So if we were to have a student that had a restraining order, sure, well, let's have 5120 so that the superintendent can move them out. Why not add an appeal process after the fact? The student can be removed, but then he'll have an appeal. What's wrong? Unless you're hiding something. Unless you want that power over all the students. Only a bully would want that. For the students to not have a right. For the families to not have a right. But that's my opinion, right? So it was just a little disheartening. You know, you can see the distraught on Megan's face, all the while the other board members are just hammering on her, saying, well, what about this restraining order? What about this? What about that? And then, you know, you have Cynthia saying, oh, we have this policy for a reason. It's there for a reason. Well, but it's your job to make sure the policies are following the law, and it's not. So that being said, they did not come to a conclusion with this, and it was very disheartening because they have to wait for the next review, which is a long while from now. So it could still be used. It could be used on your kid, it could be used on any kid within the county if the superintendent believes so. If you really look at this policy, really read it. It says that the superintendent may assign or reassign students on a case-by-case basis to schools or programs other than that designated by the attendance area when the superintendent or designee determine that such an exception is in the best educational interest of the child. So this policy, from reading it, at least the first few sentences in the paragraph, I feel it was designed for students that possibly need to go to another school that is not in their zoned area. And mind you, Neola was not created here in Florida where we have school choice. Neola was created in, I think, Ohio or something. Don't quote me on that. But so I feel like this policy that is used by different states was designed so that the superintendent can get a student that may have a sort of like talent or expertise that they would do better in another school. So the superintendent would take that student from that school and put them in another school that they would flourish better in. That's what I think anyway. That's what it reads like. And from my understanding, the part where it says the superintendent shall approve or disapprove out of area assignment request and the superintendent's decision is final and not subject to appeal was added more recently than not, if I'm not mistaken. So I feel like that part of the policy was totally ignored during the workshop. They didn't even mention that part. So why can't they have an appeal? I don't understand. Why can't they have an appeal? Even if there was a restraining order. If you take the student out of the school, if such a need is needed, you can do that with this policy, but why not have an appeal after the fact? There's two sides to every story. And I think it is a constitutional right for us to have a fast and speedy trial, is it not? And I believe that students do have that same right. So why not have this appeal added into this policy? It just doesn't make any sense. So after the workshop, we had the school board meeting. There was not much to talk on that. There was not a lot of agenda items on there that were worth talking about. The only thing I want to talk about that was mentioned throughout the meeting was a couple of board members kept reiterating the fact that we need this referendum. Now, if you've seen my interview with Jim Stanley, he goes through it beautiful. I will have another interview with him because I think it's very important as August 23rd is coming faster and faster, closer and closer. They kept reiterating the fact that we need this referendum, and I thought it was very unprofessional. I don't think they understand who's watching these meetings because it's people like us. But anyway, I came up to them and said, you keep mentioning how many teachers are resigning. Hundreds of teachers are resigning. But if this referendum is passed, it will take a whole other year for it to be in effect. A whole other year. So how many more teachers do we need to have resign before we actually do something now? Inflation is happening now. Rent is being raised now. Gas prices are being raised now. There's only going to be more resignations throughout this year. What are they going to do then? And what happens if the referendum doesn't pass? There's a lot of things that they need to think about. They're acting as if it's going to happen, but we'll see, I guess. That's it for now, folks. I hope you guys enjoyed and got a lot out of this. I will have some references in the description. Go check them out. Okay, so go to our Pasco Watch website, pascowatch.com, under the tab Our Community, Pasco County Schools, be in the know. There's also other things like school board videos, all sorts of resources. Check it out if you guys want to know more about what I've been talking about. Thanks for watching, guys. See you next time.